Chinan Janelle. Good morning, everybody. Sidak Atnakastan, Sidak Stephanie Carroll, Tishu Sta, Slandak Nelchina. Hello, I'm Stephanie Carroll. I'm Atna from the native village of Kluika along the Copper River in Alaska. If you have ever heard of or eaten Copper River salmon, those are my relatives, and that is the place. My paternal grandparents were Frank Carroll and Walya Johns. I'm also of Sicilian descent, and my maternal grandparents were Sebastiano Russo and Virginia Papalardo. We are here today in Tucson, now known as Tucson, Arizona, on the ancestral homelands of the Tohono Nation. Today, Tucson is also home to the Paskuyaki tribe. I am here to speak with you about Indigenous peoples and data. Data everywhere. The rapid growth in digital technologies has created an explosion in the generation of data to be collected, stored, shared, linked, used. Every minute, data from our bodies, from our homes, from our communities moves into the cloud, moves into our corporate data sets, big data platforms. These data are disconnected, removed, extracted from us as humans, from the natural world, and from the cosmos. But what exactly are data? Today, data are generally conceived of as digital information, gathered to be analyzed. However, digitization, perhaps like the printing press before it, flattens knowledge, changing it so much from our lived 3D experience that at some point, no meaningful connection exists in the virtual world any longer. As a result, as we become disconnected from our data, and our data become disconnected from our lived human experience, we become less accountable to those data, to each other, to humanity, to the planet. Is there an alternative? How do we bring data back into relation to us, our families, our communities? Indigenous peoples are actively reconnecting with their data and can show us a path forward. We bring data back through control, access, possession. We claim data back as our relatives for our flourishing futures. And when I speak about Indigenous peoples, I am referring to the almost 500 million people belonging to over 5,000 cultures across 90 countries worldwide. It is critical to emphasize that there is no single monolithic Indigenous culture. We live in plurality. Indigenous peoples have always been data experts. Indigenous communities have always had their own ways to care for and share information. For example, the Inca in what is now known as Chile and Peru had complex data tools. A quipu, a series of knotted strings, recorded their census and informed decision-making. Quipus can tell a variety of stories based on the fibers that are used, how those fibers are dyed, and how those fibers are then knotted. In another example, Haudenosaunee wampum belts made from shells not only store and share information, they can also serve as treaties and agreements between governments. As more and more Europeans came to these lands, relations with Indigenous peoples changed. Settler colonial policies and practices used by governments, churches, investors, entrepreneurs, explorers like researchers, and settlers sought to gain money and power from the taking of land. They used weapons such as relocating people, stealing and killing children, and suppressing Indigenous knowledge systems to break down roles and responsibilities within communities. The physical erasure of peoples and people from these lands is replicated again today via data, its uses, misuses, and abuses. Today, Indigenous peoples are largely invisible in data. Our data are extracted to be used for somebody else's purposes. Our data are weaponized to further oppress and kill us. How do we reconcile Indigenous peoples' colonized data experiences with the data potentials of tomorrow? Indigenous peoples' own conceptions of data show us the power, the beauty, and the futures we can hold. Indigenous data are our relations. Indigenous data are our relatives. Data live. Data breathe. Indigenous data are our relationships, connecting us to the past, the present, the future, each other, the non-human world. Indigenous data are the plant growing up in the mine tailings, the salmon swimming upstream caught in the fish wheel, my child's continuous glucose monitor transmitting to the cloud, my Amazon purchase history, our languages, baskets, stories. Indigenous peoples had ways for caring for and sharing their knowledge and information embedded within relationships since time immemorial. Today, Indigenous peoples are making what's old new again via the Indigenous data sovereignty movement and through Indigenous-led efforts such as the U.S. Indigenous Data Sovereignty Network and the Global Indigenous Data Alliance. Indigenous data sovereignty asserts the rights of Indigenous peoples as political collectives to govern the collection, application, and use of their own data. It translates roles and responsibilities that Indigenous peoples have for the care and use of their knowledge and information from this world into the virtual world. Indigenous data sovereignty translates roles and responsibilities that Indigenous peoples already have for the care and use of their knowledge and information from this living, breathing, earthly world into the digital environment. It leverages and upholds human and planetary rights. It is grounded in the past, responsive to the present, and responsible to the future. Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous peoples had and are creating laws, policies, practices, protocols, infrastructure to care for their data as their relatives and to create relationships around their data. The Passamaquoddy tribe and what is now known as Maine did just this. The U.S. Library of Congress's oldest wax cylinder recording holds one of their war songs. The tribe approached the Library of Congress to reclaim that song and the cylinder. They refused to let them go. The tribe refused to remain disconnected from their song, their relative. Working with allies, the tribe created the local context traditional knowledge labels. These digital tags ensure that protocols for the care and use of knowledge and information travel with data, maintaining Indigenous peoples' relationships to those data through time and space. The tribe then updated information at the Library of Congress, including what the song was about and who sang that song, and then applied the attribution, outreach, and non-commercial traditional knowledge labels. This powerful story shows us how a tribe can govern its data even when the colonial project will not let it go. Today, users of those data not only properly attribute it to the tribe, they must also deal with the living, self-determining tribe as it sets restrictions and permissions for the use and reuse of that information. Perhaps even more importantly, though, the community itself uses that data for cultural and other flourishings. The Passamaquoddy brought their song home. So what? What does this mean in the face of rapid growth of digital technologies and data? Indigenous data sovereignty exists. Data back is a way to reestablish accountability between this real, 3D, messy, colonized collective experience of Indigenous peoples and the virtual world being built without them as yet another colonial venture. With data back, Indigenous peoples are representing themselves to the world, reclaiming their data through control and ownership. Through data back, Indigenous peoples are representing themselves, demanding to be engaged with as they exist now. It is critical that we consider data as living and breathing, as reconstituting our 3D world, as relatives, as peoples, as families, as communities. Every day when you're sitting in a meeting, driving in your car, listening to a podcast, remember, we are responsible to these data for our children's futures. These data connect us as individuals and communities. But is action and knowledge at the individual level enough? No, it is not. We must also call upon our institutions, our governments, our corporations, our organizations, our universities to be responsible to us, to strengthen relationships with Indigenous peoples around their data, to promote Indigenous leadership for our shared data futures, to embrace Indigenous designs for data, technology, and more. Open your eyes to Indigenous peoples. We are still here. We are not only survivors of the past, we are peoples of the present with futures to steward. We are reclaiming our relatives and our relationships. We need our data back. Thank you.